A good night of Shabbos. Shabbos is almost here, beginning tonight. It's great to be learning with you on a Friday afternoon. Let's light up the darkness. It's always a more intimate group here on a Friday afternoon. Some people are still at work, but we need to leave time to get ready for Shabbos. Who is with us? Yehud in Florence, South Carolina. Steve in Dover, New Hampshire. James in Indianapolis. Bill in mid-Missouri. Guy in Dayton, Ohio. Paula in Chicago. Rose in New Mexico. And Tadeo says shalom. And over there on the YouTube side, Yitzhak with us in Kansas City. Welcome, everybody. Today, with God's help, we are completing chapter 5 here in Tractate Yevamos, the 14th volume of the Talmud, the laws of levirate marriage. And now we also just completed working our way through Eitan Katz's album Unplugged. That was part 2 of his song Nigun Neshama. Okay, let's get right into it. We pick this up right at the very bottom of 52b. Our daf is page 53, Nun Gimel. All right, at the bottom of 52b, it was taught in another baraisa with regard to one who performs chalitzah with his yevama and then betroths her. That's what this whole chapter 5 has been about, is the normal thing under Torah law after a man dies childless, leaving a widow and a brother, that they have that levirate obligation, the levirate bond. It has, even before they do anything else, that bond itself creates not only the obligation to perform yibum or chalitzah, but certain other matters as well. As we've seen, if he refused to do either yibum or chalitzah, he would have to support her because of that bond. At any rate, we learned yesterday that the correct way to perform yibum is to first do a levirate betrothal, that they promise each other they're going to get married, and then later they do the yibum. Or they can just perform chalitzah. But when we add a betrothal that they then break up with a get, or just a get because they mistakenly thought they could break the levirate bond by giving a bill of divorce rather than the chalitzah ceremony, all these other complications ensued. Okay, so it is taught in another baraisa with regard to one who performs chalitzah. Okay, so that would break the levirate bond. Now they're free to go their separate ways. If there was a co-wife, she is exempt. She doesn't need chalitzah or yibum. If there were other brothers, right, other yavams, so they are now released. They have no further obligation. The one chalitzah between one brother and one of the wives, if there were more than one wife, would release everybody from all yibum obligations. Okay, so with regard to one who performs chalitzah with his yevama, and then he betroths her. Now this should mean nothing, right? The chalitzah releases them. Now he's going to betroth her. To do what? If he's going to betroth her to perform yibum, hey, it's too late. Now it's too late. You don't have a yibum situation anymore because you perform chalitzah. Can he betroth her to just get married, a regular marriage? How can he? She is his brother's widow. She was permitted to him only because the brother didn't have children and there's a yibum obligation. But now that they perform chalitzah, it's no more. They don't have that option. They cannot get married. So this betrothal should be ineffective and have no effect at all. However, as we'll see, according to one of the opinions, it does have an effect. The effect is they're not allowed to be married, but because they did this erroneous betrothal after chalitzah, they're also going to require a get, a bill of divorce, before she becomes permitted to everyone else. That betrothal, an invalid betrothal, will nevertheless require a bill of divorce in order to break it. So, with regard to one who performs chalitzah with his Yevama and then betroths her, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says, right, Rebbe, if he betrothed her for the purpose of regular marriage, she requires a bill of divorce from him. If he betrothed her for the purpose of levirate marriage, thinking that he could still perform yibum after the chalitzah, then she does not require a bill of divorce from him. Then it is meaningless. And the rabbis who disagree with Rebbe say, whether he betrothed her for the purpose of a regular marriage or he betrothed her for the purpose of levirate marriage, he did so after chalitzah, so they cannot get married. This betrothal will not work to produce a marriage, but he must give her a bill of divorce before she's fully free to go. That betrothal after the chalitzah does have some effect, and that is the law. Rav Yosef said, what is the reason for Rebbe's distinction between one who betroths his chalitzah for the purpose of levirate marriage and one who does so for the purpose of regular marriage? It is because the sages considered him like one who hoes the property of a convert. One who hoes the property of a convert. What does that mean? So if somebody converts to Judaism, under Jewish law, his previous relatives from when he was a non-Jew are no longer his relatives for the purpose of the law of inheritance. It's like he's a newborn babe without relatives when he converts to Judaism. So if he doesn't get married and have children and leave heirs after he becomes a Jew, if he doesn't make a will and then, bequeath his property to some specific person, but if he just dies, right, without naming any heirs and without leaving any familial heirs, then it's like his property is ownerless and anyone can come and claim it. And one of the forms of claiming ownerless land is to go in and work the land. So if you hoe the land, ownerless land, then you can lay claim to it. It's sort of like squatters' rights, and then it becomes your land. How is this similar to the distinction between one who performs a betrothal after chalitzah and distinguishing between whether he makes that betrothal for the purpose of yibum or makes that betrothal for the purpose of regular marriage? How is this comparable to one who hoes the property of a convert? The property of such a convert is ownerless, and whoever takes possession of it acquires its title. As one of the methods of taking possession of land is hoeing, if one hoed the property of this convert with the intention of acquiring it, so then it belongs to him. However, if he didn't realize that the land was ownerless, if he just thought it was actually his land, he wasn't sure where the boundary was between his land and his neighbor who happened to be a convert who died without leaving heirs, and so he performed the same action. He went and hoed that land. But his intention was just to hoe his own land. He didn't realize that he was hoeing ownerless land. So then his same act of hoeing, but with a different intention, does not acquire title for him. If one hoed the property of this convert with the intention of acquiring it, it belongs to him. If he hoed it while mistakenly thinking that it was already his own, then even though he performed what seems like an act of acquisition, since he lacked the requisite intention, he has not acquired the land. And here too, since the Yavam intended to betroth her for the purpose of levirate marriage, and the levirate bond no longer exists because he already performed chalitzah, his action has no effect. Abaye said, are these two situations comparable? There, in the case of hoeing, he does not intend to acquire the land as he works. He just thought it was his own land. as he thinks it is already his. Whereas here, he does intend to acquire the woman when he performs this betrothal. So this case is similar only to the one who hoes the property of this deceased convert while thinking that it is the property of a different deceased convert. And the law in that case is he does acquire the land. Even though he was unsure of the particulars of who was the convert who died and left no heirs, it was not this guy, but that guy. Nevertheless, he was hoeing the property for the purpose of acquiring it, and so he does acquire it. So rather, Abaye said that the dispute between Rebbe and the rabbis on this betrothal after chalitzah, and making a distinction whether he's doing that betrothal for the purpose of performing a levirate marriage or for the purpose of a regular marriage, how shall we understand it? Says Abaye, with what are we dealing here? It is a case where he said to his chalitzah, be betrothed to me with levirate betrothal. And Rebbe holds that levirate betrothal is superimposed upon the levirate bond and is therefore only possible when the bond exists. And since chalitzah comes and breaks the levirate bond, so now levirate betrothal is not effective for her and he didn't do anything. But the rabbis hold this, the levirate bond, stands on its own, and that, the levirate betrothal, stands on its own. And although the bond was canceled by chalitzah, the formula of be betrothed to me with levirate betrothal nevertheless has some effect. At the outset, before the chalitzah, if he said to me, be betrothed to me with a levirate betrothal, would this not be an effective betrothal, despite the lack of connection between the levirate betrothal and the levirate bond? Now, too, it should be effective, even though she performed chalitzah. And that is the law. Even though they perform chalitzah, he comes along and says, be betrothed to me as a levirate betrothal. He can't go ahead and marry her after that. He can only give her a get, but he must give her the get because the language of be betrothed to me as a levirate betrothal has some effect. Rava said, if he said to her, be betrothed to me with levirate betrothal, everyone agrees that it is effective and she is acquired. With what are we dealing with here? It is a case where he said to her, be betrothed to me with the levirate bond, and the dispute is as follows. Rebbe holds, on 53a now, the levirate bond is substantial, and this betrothal is based on the levirate bond. And in this case, the chalitzah comes and releases the levirate bond. Therefore, this type of betrothal does not acquire the chalitzah. But the rabbis hold that the levirate bond is not substantial, meaning the bond itself does not create a connection between the Yavam and Yevama, and that in general, levirate betrothal acquires a Yevama as a form of betrothal unrelated to the levirate bond. And consequently, at the outset, if he said to her, be betrothed to me by the levirate bond, would this not be effective? Now too, after chalitzah, even without the bond, it should likewise be effective. And Rav Sherevia suggested a different point of dispute, and he said, in a case when the woman performed a valid chalitzah, if he later said to her, be betrothed to me by the levirate bond, everyone agrees that it is not effective, as there is no longer any levirate bond. And here they disagree with regard to one who performed an invalid chalitzah. One sage, Rebbe, holds that an invalid chalitzah exempts her from the levirate bond and disqualifies her from betrothal as a yevama. And the other sage, meaning the rabbis, holds that invalid chalitzah does not fully exempt her, and some element of the levirate bond remains intact, and she can therefore be betrothed with a levirate bond. Rav Ashi said, everyone agrees that invalid chalitzah does not exempt her and does not entirely nullify the bond. And here they disagree as to whether a condition is effective with regard to chalitzah. So they're trying to explain away how there are different viewpoints on what exactly this betrothal after chalitzah produces. Right? What exactly is the point that they're disagreeing on? And they're actually introducing different ideas about how to understand this distinction. Now they're introducing the idea of a conditional chalitzah, and that is what rendered it invalid. What does this mean? When the Yavam states that he is performing chalitzah on the condition that the Yevama give him 100 dinars. Imagine such a guy. This guy's a real louse, right? He should marry her. That would be the ideal thing, at least during a period in history when Yibum is permitted. That way he could build up his brother's house. He and she are just never going to get along. They just can't see themselves married. Okay, so then they should perform chalitzah so that she can go and be married to someone else. Back then, a man could have multiple wives, so even if she's bound to him in some way, he could still go off and get married. She can't. So he says to her, you know what, I'm not going to perform chalitzah with you unless you give me money. Right? He's like holding her ransom. She's not going to be able to go off and live her own life unless she pays him. Right? That's what he's saying. I'll perform chalitzah if you pay me. Is this going to be valid? Let's keep reading. So when the Yavam states he is performing chalitzah on the condition that the Yavama give him 100 dinars, for example, is this condition effective? And therefore the chalitzah is nullified if the condition is not fulfilled. For example, he says, I'll perform chalitzah if you give me money. She says, okay. Then he performs the chalitzah and she doesn't give him money. So then is the chalitzah still a valid chalitzah, or was it nullified because she didn't fulfill the condition that he set and that she agreed to? So one sage, the rabbis hold that a condition is effective with regard to chalitzah. If the Yavama fails to comply with the condition, so then the chalitzah is ineffective and she can still be betrothed with the levirate bond. And the other sage, Rebbe, holds that a condition is not effective with regard to chalitzah, and therefore the chalitzah is always effective, as is the subsequent levirate betrothal. Right? So according to this opinion, that condition doesn't work for chalitzah. No matter what he said before performing the chalitzah, he then performed chalitzah. It is a chalitzah. And then if they later decide to do a betrothal and get married, they can't because they perform chalitzah. If they do that betrothal, they'll still require a get to undo the betrothal, but they certainly can't get married because it was a valid chalitzah. Ravina said, everyone agrees that a condition is effective with regard to chalitzah, and here they disagree with regard to a compound condition. What is that? One sage, Rebbe, holds that we require a compound condition. The man must explicitly stipulate that the chalitzah should be effective if the condition is upheld, and that it should not be effective if she does not fulfill the condition, right? If I perform chalitzah, you will give me 100 dinars and it'll be a valid chalitzah. But if you do not give me the 100 dinars, then it will not be a valid chalitzah. You have to state both sides of the condition. If you do X, such and such will result. If you do not do X, such and such will result. That's a compound condition. So if he did not state both the positive and negative sides of the condition, then the condition does not take effect, and the chalitzah is effective, and the levirate bond is canceled. Consequently, betrothal by the levirate bond after such a chalitzah is ineffective because the chalitzah was valid and completely canceled the levirate bond. And the other sage, i.e. the rabbis, holds that we do not require a compound condition, and therefore the condition applies and cancels the chalitzah, which leaves the levirate bond intact. What is the law? No conditions can be set on a chalitzah. No matter what this guy says, I'll perform chalitzah if you give me money, or if you do this, or if you take out the trash, or if you clean up my house, whatever he says, if he performs chalitzah, the chalitzah is valid. Then if they did a betrothal after the chalitzah, they would just be dealing with what is the situation after a chalitzah. But the chalitzah would be valid. This idea of the compound condition, we actually learn that from the deal that Moses made with the tribes of Reuven and Gad, right? When the children of Israel had wandered for 40 years in the desert and were about to enter the promised land. Moses is not going to get to enter. Joshua will lead them in. But Moses was alive up until the very end, right? Moses lived to 120, died on his birthday. The whole book of Deuteronomy is his sort of final, ethical will, as it were, teaching the people all that he could before he has to leave them. One of the things that happens in the book of Deuteronomy is that these tribes of Gad and Reuben who are on the east side of the Jordan River and say, this land is perfect for us. We'd like to get our inheritance here. And Moses says, what's wrong with you people? 40 years you've been wandering so you could get into the promised land, and now you want to stop here just short? No. Moreover, when the children of Israel go in, they're going to need to fight some battles and wars against the people who are there now, the child-sacrificing pagans that God is unhappy with and wants out of the promised land. But there's going to require some war in order to make that happen. So the children of Israel, of Reuben and Gad, say, no, we're not saying that that we'd like to abandon the effort to enter the promised land. We're just saying that this should be part of the promised land. It's perfect land for us and our cattle. We're cattle herds, right? So this land would be good for us, but we certainly plan to join the armies of the children of Israel as we enter the promised land, and we'll help fight and conquer, those evil child-sacrificing Canaanites. And then once that war is over, then we'll come back and settle this land. And so Moses says, if you join the children of Israel in the conquest of the land, then you can come back and settle here, and this will be your inheritance. But if you don't join them in the conquest of the land, then this will not be your inheritance. So that became the model for making any kind of a condition, in the law of contracts under Jewish law, that you have to state both the positive and the negative. What will happen if you fulfill the condition, and what will happen if you don't fulfill the condition? That's required to make a valid condition. And that's called a compound condition. Okay. At any rate, the law is you can't make a condition, you can't make a conditional chalitzah. If the guy performs the chalitzah, it's a valid chalitzah. New subject. The Mishna teaches, our Mishna, this one Mishna of chapter 5. If the Yavam perform chalitzah and then either performed levirate betrothal or gave a bill of divorce or engaged in bia, intercourse, nothing is effective after chalitzah. Right, so according to that view that's stated in the Mishnah, once they break the levirate bond, none of these other things matter. Right? They broke the levirate bond by performing chalitzah. If they then had intercourse together, they didn't perform yibum and get married. No, they performed a sin because this is a brother who slept with his brother's wife. Right? The yibum canceled the levirate bond, so they can no longer have relations ever again. Yibum is off the table. If it be formed a betrothal, unfortunately, it has some effect that they're going to require a get to get rid of that levirate betrothal after chalitzah. And that is the law, according to the majority. But you might have thought that nothing is effective after chalitzah. But the rabbi said, no, but if you made a betrothal after chalitzah, you have to undo it. So there is some effect to a betrothal after chalitzah. Right, so the Mishnah taught that if the Yavam perform chalitzah and then levirate betrothal or a get or intercourse, nothing is effective after the chalitzah. That didn't end up being the law. The Gemara asks, and let the Tan of the Mishnah likewise teach that nothing is effective after bia, nothing is effective after intercourse. Meaning, if the first thing the Yavam and the Yavama did was have intercourse, then under Torah law, they're married. Period. End of story. They're married. He could give her a get just to end that marriage. That would be effective. But in terms of a levirate betrothal or a chalitzah or a get intended to break the levirate bond, none of those would have any effect after the intercourse, or in Hebrew, bia. So the Gemara asks, why didn't the Tana likewise teach that nothing is effective after bia? For he also mentioned the case of one who engaged in intercourse and then proceeded to perform other actions such as levirate betrothal, divorce, and chalitzah. And indeed, Abaye and Rava both teach that the Mishnah should teach nothing is effective after intercourse, as this clause is fit to be inserted into the Mishnah. And the Gemara asks, and the Tana of our Mishnah, why did he not state this? And the Gemara explains, the permission for a Yevama to marry a member of the public is preferable to him. He preferred to teach cases in which the Yevama becomes permitted to marry any man from the general public, which is what the case after chalitzah, as opposed to a situation where she is married to the Yavam. It's the same law that, according to him, after chalitzah, nothing else is effective, or after intercourse, nothing else is effective. He could have taught either one. He just decided to teach the one after chalitzah because that renders her permitted to go and marry some other man. The Mishna teaches that all of the halachas, all of the laws with regard to levirate betrothal, after levirate betrothal, and the like, apply both in cases of one Yevama to one Yavam, as well as in cases of two Yevamos to one Yavam. Now there, betrothal after betrothal really makes a lot more sense. If the man who died had two wives and he had one brother, so what happens if he makes a betrothal to both of the women? He makes a levirate betrothal with both of them. What has he done, right? Now what he needs to do is perform either chalitzah or yibum with one of those wives, and then the other one is going to be released. If he's going to perform yibum, as we've learned, the correct procedure would be to first make a betrothal with that one woman and then perform yibum and marry her, and the co-wife would just be released. If he did a betrothal with one and a betrothal with the other, very confusing situation. He cannot perform yibum with both. Is he now on track to perform yibum with the first one that he betrothed, and the second betrothal means nothing, or the second betrothal must lead to a get because it was invalid? Where are we with that? Let's keep reading. So the Gemara comments, the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Ben Azai. As it is taught in a Baraisa, Ben Azai says, levirate betrothal is effective after levirate betrothal in the case of two Yevamim and one Yevama, two brothers and one widow. But levirate betrothal is not effective after levirate betrothal in the case of two Yevamos and one Yavam. The Tana of the Mishnah, in contrast, does not distinguish between these cases. And the Mishnah further teaches, how so? If he performed levirate betrothal with this one, and he performed chalitzah with that one, so then the first woman requires a bill of divorce to cancel the levirate betrothal. The Gemara suggests, let us say that this teaching supports the opinion of Shmuel. As Shmuel said, if a Yavam, the brother, performed chalitzah with the woman who received levirate betrothal, then the rival wife is not exempt, as this chalitzah is invalid. This is an invalid chalitzah, right? He's not finished. If he had just performed chalitzah with her, she's released, the co-wife is released, all good. Because he made a levirate betrothal first, indicating that he planned to perform yibum, but instead then perform chalitzah, this is an invalid chalitzah. If he performed the levirate betrothal first, he then should give her a get, and then chalitzah. Then it would be a valid chalitzah, but he didn't do that. The fact that the Gemara does not state that the chalitzah be performed with the woman who received levirate betrothal indicates that this chalitzah is not a valid chalitzah and would not be sufficient to exempt the co-wife, the rival wife. And this would constitute a conclusive refutation of Rav Yosef's opinion, for he holds that it is preferable to perform chalitzah with the woman who received levirate betrothal and thereby exempt the second woman. Why is that preferable? Because the first woman who had a levirate betrothal, and then you're planning to do chalitzah with her. Okay, so you give her a get, a bill of divorce to undo the betrothal. Then the chalitzah undoes the levirate bond. She's free, and the co-wife is exempted. The co-wife didn't become either a chalitzah or a divorcee, so she remains permitted to marry a priest. It's not like she necessarily wants to marry a priest, but she still can. If instead you did one woman levirate betrothal and then a get, but you perform chalitzah with the other co-wife, now both of these women are prohibited to marry priests. One is a divorcee, the other is a chalitzah, and neither one is permitted to a priest. Now the Gemara refutes this claim. Does the Mishnah teach he should perform chalitzah, which would imply that the Yavam should do so ab initio? It teaches that he performed chalitzah, implying that the ruling in the Mishnah is after the fact. Therefore, there is no indication in the Mishnah that the Yavam should perform chalitzah with the second woman, and it is possible that if he were to perform chalitzah with the first woman, he would thereby exempt the second one. It is simply that the particular case discussed by the Mishnah here concerns a man who performed levirate betrothal with this woman and chalitzah with that one. It is further taught in the Mishnah, if he gave a bill of divorce to this one and a bill of divorce to that one, he thought that he could use a get, a bill of divorce, to break the levirate bond. And so he gave a bill of divorce to both of them. That was a total mistake. So what has he accomplished? Well, one thing he's accomplished is he's not going to be allowed to perform yibum with either one of them. Now he has to perform chalitzah with at least one of them, to release the levirate bond, and then the other one should be exempt, but I think we saw one opinion that because he gave a get, kind of messed things up, and he might have to do something else and do chalitzah with both of them. Right? So if he gave a bill of divorce to this one and a bill of divorce to that one, they require chalitzah from him. And the Gemara suggests, let us say that it supports the statement of Rabba bar Rav Huna. As Rabba bar Rav Huna said, in cases of an invalid chalitzah, the Yavam is required to repeat the chalitzah with all of the brothers, as that single invalid chalitzah is insufficient. Similarly, in this case of invalid chalitzah, it would be necessary to perform chalitzah with all of the Yevamos. He gave a bill of divorce to both. Now he's going to have to perform chalitzah with both of them. It would have been better to just perform chalitzah with one of them, then the other one's released. Because he gave a get to both, he has to do chalitzah with both. Why would that be the policy? Kind of makes sense because the one who received that, mistaken bill of divorce he shouldn't have done, but he did. And then because this other one, her co-wife had a bill of divorce and then a chalitzah, so if you just release the one who got that, just the bill of divorce, people might think that she was released because of a bill of divorce when she was a Yevama. And to avoid that mistake, because there was the mistaken bill of divorce given, now also chalitzah is going to be required with anyone who got that mistaken bill of divorce. It was taught in the Mishnah, if he gave a bill of divorce to this one, that co-wife, and he performed chalitzah with that one, so nothing is effective after chalitzah. And the Gemara suggests, well, let us say that this supports the opinion of Shmuel, as it indicates that the Yavam should perform chalitzah with the rival wife rather than the woman who received a bill of divorce. And it would likewise be a conclusive refutation of Rav Yosef, who prefers performing chalitzah with the disqualified woman so that the other co-wife can remain qualified to marry a priest. The Gemara rejects this proof. Does it teach he should perform chalitzah? A ruling ab initio? It teaches he performed chalitzah, which is only after the fact, meaning he acted in that manner in this particular case, and now we're dealing with it. The Mishnah taught, if he performed chalitzah with one woman and then performed chalitzah with the other one. Now the first chalitzah released the second woman, so you'd think that second chalitzah is just meaningless. So the Mishnah taught, if he performed chalitzah with one woman and then performed chalitzah with the other, or he performed chalitzah and then proceeded to perform levirate betrothal, nothing is effective after chalitzah. The Gemara suggests, and let the Tana also teach, nothing is effective after intercourse, as this is indicated in the Mishnah as well. The Gemara answers, indeed, Abaye and Rava both say it should teach nothing is effective after intercourse, and the Tana of our Mishnah did not state this because the permission for Yevama to marry a member of the public is preferable to him, as we said earlier. New subject. It is taught in the Mishnah. Nothing is effective after chalitzah, both in cases of one Yavam and two Yevamos, one brother and two widows, as well as cases of two widows and one brother. And the Gemara comments, granted, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who said that once a Yavam has performed chalitzah with his Yevama, the entire household, the woman who performed chalitzah as well as her rival wives, is liable due to a prohibition derived from the verse, so shall it be done to the man who does not build his brother's house. In other words, liable because he did stuff after performing a chalitzah when everyone should have been released. Now he betrothed someone, he's liable for violating a prohibition. But what prohibition is it? The women are not liable to chorus due to the prohibition with regard to a brother's wife. In light of Rabbi Yochanan's ruling, it was necessary to teach us that betrothal does not take effect on the rival wife of a woman who performed chalitzah, despite the fact that she is only liable for violating a prohibition in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. However, according to Reish Lakish, who said that the entire household, apart from the woman who received chalitzah, is liable to receive kares, if they then, now they're no longer permitted to each other, but if they had relations anyway, what has been violated, right? So they are liable to receive kares. So was it necessary to teach that the betrothal does not take effect in forbidden relations for which one, if one performed them, he'd be liable to receive kares? According to excision at the hands of the heavenly court, according to Reish Lakish, after the Yavam performs chalitzah, the mitzvah of levirate marriage is canceled, and the kares prohibition against marrying a brother's wife is once again in force. As all agree that betrothal does not take effect on those who are liable to receive kares, you can't betroth someone who is prohibited to you with a kares bearing penalty for the prohibition, so it is unnecessary for the Mishnah to teach this ruling. The Gemara answers, Reish Lakish could have said to you, and according to your reasoning, that the Mishnah would not be teaching us an apparently obvious law, consider the latter clause of the Mishnah, which teaches that if a Yavam engaged in intercourse and another Yavam performed levirate betrothal with the same woman, the levirate betrothal is not effective. Now, was it necessary to teach us that betrothal is not effective for a married woman? Obviously, you can't betroth a woman who's already married to someone else. So if one Yavam performed Yibum with her, they're married. The other Yavam, the other brother, can't come along and betroth her. It would be a meaningless betrothal. It wouldn't even need a get afterward. Rather, it must be that not every clause in the Mishnah teaches a novel law. And the reasoning of the Tan is like this. Since he teaches the release of the bond between one Yavam and one Yevama, he also teaches the case of two Yevamos and one Yavam. And since he teaches the case of two Yevamos and one Yavam, right, two widows and one brother, he also teaches the case of two Yevamin and one Yevama, two brothers and one widow. The Tana therefore listed all possible cases, even though we do not learn a novel law from each and every one. Now we're on 53b, and we're not going to finish 53b because the chapter is going to end, and we're going to continue with chapter 6 tomorrow. 53b. It was taught in the Mishnah, if he performed chalitzah and then proceeded to perform levirate betrothal, or gave a bill of divorce, or engaged in intercourse with a second woman, nothing is effective after chalitzah. The Gemara asks, granted, it was necessary to teach that in the case of one who performed chalitzah and then performed levirate betrothal, the levirate betrothal is not effective. For it might enter your mind to say that we should issue a decree with regard to levirate betrothal that takes place after chalitzah, due to levirate betrothal that takes place before chalitzah, and rule that any kind of levirate betrothal that you do has some effect and will require a get to undo it just to avoid confusion. The Mishnah therefore teages us that we do not issue such a decree in this case. However, the case of one who performed chalitzah and gave a bill of divorce, why do I need this case? What novelty is there in the teaching that a bill of divorce after chalitzah is not effective? And the Gemara answers, according to your reasoning, that each new case must teach something new, say the latter clause of the Mishnah. If he engaged in intercourse and then proceeded to perform levirate betrothal, or give a bill of divorce, or perform chalitzah with a second woman, nothing is effective. In this case, the same question can be asked. Granted, it was necessary to teach the case of one who engaged in intercourse and then gave a bill of divorce. This is because it might enter your mind to say that we should issue a decree with regard to a bill of divorce that is given after intercourse due to the bill of divorce that is given before intercourse. Intercourse meaning that creates a marriage by yibum. And decree that this bill of divorce alone is insufficient and she requires chalitza as well. And the Mishnah therefore teaches us that we do not issue such a decree, but the case of a Yavam who engaged in intercourse and performed levirate betrothal, why do I need to state it? Once he has engaged in intercourse with her, she is his wife in all regards. What difference does levirate betrothal make? Rather, one must say that since the Tana of the Mishnah taught the case of one who performed chalitza and then perform levirate betrothal. He also taught the case of one who engaged in intercourse and then performed levirate betrothal due to the similarity between these cases. And since he wished to teach the case of one who engaged in intercourse and then gave a bill of divorce, he also taught the case of one who performed chalitzah and then gave a bill of divorce. We should therefore not infer anything from these superfluous cases, as they are merely stated for stylistic reasons. There's 3 more paragraphs, but basically going through the same kind of reasoning, why these clauses were included or not. They're somewhat confusing, so you should read it on your own to make sure you've completed the daf, but I'm going to knock off there and go to questions or comments. Okay, here on Yevamos 53, and Nina is telling me we have no questions or even comments that require addressing. So, great learning with you on a Friday afternoon, and with God's help, tomorrow night, Motzi Shabbos. It's getting toward the summertime, so it's starting to get later and later. But so after Shabbos ends tomorrow night, about an hour after it ends here in LA, we'll go live and open chapter 6 here in Tractate Yevamos. All the best and have a great Shabbos.